Hey, pilot wives and fellow aviators. I'm Jackie Elmer, bringing you part two of my interview series with Highway to the Sky author Lola Reid Allin. Make sure if you haven't listened to part one, you do. On this one, we're going to get into a little bit more juicy details, and we kind of finish off with her travel to nearly 70 countries and some inspiring advice about some travel destinations that might interest you. Make sure you grab the checklist at Pilot Wife Podcast or pilotwifechecklist.com. Welcome to the Pilot Wife Podcast. I'm your co-captain, Jackie Elmer. I've been a pilot wife for over 3 decades, and I cannot imagine any other lifestyle. Yes, there's no doubt it's a mix of turbulence and blue skies, but what life isn't? I'm here to bring you the best that the aviation life has to offer. And if you want the Pilot Wife Survival Guide and Checklist, go to pilotwifechecklist.com. Now, stow your baggage, strap in, and let's unpack the pilot wife life.
Whoever our son was with, that was who was responsible financially. And it was occasionally a bit difficult because my husband did earn more money than me. I won't complain about what I was earning, but he did earn more money than me. So we did that flip-flop for several years. And then as our son got older and really needed to be at high school in one school, in one school district even, and by this time my husband had remarried to this wonderful woman who I would have picked as a nanny. And they said, well, how do you feel about Brandon staying here all school year and you have him throughout the summers and all the other vacations? And it was kind of hard, but it was also easier and it was definitely better for him. So even though I picked the wrong man, ultimately he was such a great dad, it worked out,
Well, very
thankfully.
good. Life's a journey, and I tend to believe there are no mistakes. It all takes us to the next spot. So the
It
next place is
does.
supposed to be.
Yeah, I agree. My regret was simply that I really hurt this man and I could have done it differently. But you're right. I didn't do it again. I learned from that one big time. Yeah, I, I haven't been perfect for sure, but I do try to treat people the way that I would like to be treated. I'm not always there,
Well,
I guess, but
it's always a good place to strive for, right? So you mentioned dating a man who was also a pilot. How were you received by other men in the profession in general?
um, very mixed. So as I was training, I was very well received. They were mostly men, they were mostly male instructors, and I was certainly well received by the flying schools, of course, because it's a business and they need the money. And generally, I had some really great instructors. The problem became very obvious generally when I became employed as a pilot, and even the problem was a hangover from World War II when the WASPs in America and then in Canada the ATAs and in Britain the ATAs flew planes, flew military planes flew warplanes from one base to another, flew them across the ocean to Britain so that the men could fly them in combat roles during World War II. But once World War II ended and the men came back, the men wanted their jobs back. They wanted those jobs that, Rosie the Riveter had taken over or Rosie the pilot had taken over. So women were literally forced back into the homes in most cases. There was a rare case, I'm sure, that continued flying. And women had been flying all along in sort of fun roles. I mean, sure, doing some great things, long distance flying, breaking records, flying across oceans, flying around the world. But taking jobs from men was a big thing. And the first airline pilot in America, female, was in 1934. She was forced out of her job by the all-male pilots union, who persuaded what is now the FAA to restrict her license today VFR, so day visual flight rules only, which meant she couldn't fly at night and she couldn't fly in bad weather, which today is constructive dismissal, but it wasn't then, and she quit. That was Helen Rishi. And the next wave of female commercial pilots wasn't until 1973, when two were hired in America and one in Canada. So I was just a little bit past that, a few years after that. And generally, men were skeptical. Men, I think, felt a bit threatened. And they were certainly all puzzled because their frame of reference, like mine, was, yeah, my mom had a job. Yes, she was a legal secretary, but dad was the real breadwinner. Basically, he earned more money. He was expected to have a job. And the guys I worked with one or two exceptions, which you can read about in the book, generally they were either supportive and friendly and helpful, or they were ambivalent. And within a couple at the other spectrum, and there was also, and I literally just read about this yesterday on the one of the secret or invitation only Facebook groups, about men being afraid to speak up in defense of a female co-worker or a female student, for fear of being ostracized or adversely affected by the rest of the male population. And this apparently is still a real thing. And that's actually why I wanted to write the book, so that we could start having or continue having discussions, and more open discussions. So for example, in the Facebook group, until I joined it, I had no idea these things, like, whoa, didn't you're sitting there in the pilot seat, or you're wearing, stripes and a cap, and you're asked, didn't you just borrow that uniform? Or what are you serving for supper? That kind of stuff. And it's, these are little, I mean, sometimes they're really genuine questions, but a lot of times they're rather disingenuous, and sort of our microaggressions that after a while are difficult. But it was a big thing. Even my grandfather, who was the best guy going, was deeply concerned that I was quitting my perfectly good job with the bank. And his reason wasn't that I thought initially, was because the planes weren't as safe as they are now compared to the barnstorming planes that he was familiar with. And he's, no, it's just that you're going to take jobs from men who need them. It's like, wow, I need a job. In case you hadn't noticed, I got separated. I need a job, Grandpa. Anyway, he immediately apologized. But then, just like you were saying about the pronoun thing, that was his first gut visceral reaction. What are you doing? Last year you left your husband, and this year you're taking jobs from men. That's changing a bit, of course, as the younger pilots have more role models. They can see that women are flying. The interesting thing, even though there are a lot more women flying than there were in 1979 when I started, there were like 480 female pilots with a commercial license. That didn't mean they were actually flying and earning money. They just had a commercial license, which I encourage people to do, because it's that much more education and experience. That's 480 in America. In Canada, it was probably, we have 10% of the population, 48. So very few. So I had no colleagues that were female. Some of the guys who were supportive were wonderful. But, there are some conversations, and I think guys would agree, some conversations that are better with the same gender, or same identifying gender, however you want to phrase that. But there's some things that I might feel more comfortable talking with you about than I would with your husband, for example. And no slight against your husband. And I don't pick him because he's a pilot, just because he's a guy. There's some things that women realize that, and so do men, right? But the other problem was it was very lonely because there were so few women pilots. None of them were at my home base ever. I was always the only female until maybe the last month that I worked as a pilot. Now I like being alone, but on the other hand, I never felt like I really belonged. And I didn't ever want to be a guy. I refused to wear a tie too, by the way. I just said, no way. I don't want to be a guy. I just want to be a pilot. Why do I have to look like a guy? I did wear pants because that made perfect sense. Slogging around an airplane in a skirt, probably not the best thing. Not flying in the subarctic loading baggage anyway, not a good idea. But a tie, well, I hate them anyway. I wasn't going to wear one. But I wanted to emphasize that I didn't want to be a guy. I just wanted to fly airplanes. And I also didn't like organized sports. So one thing the guys would do would go to the bar, no problem, and watch the football game. I mean, sure, that's a lot of fun for some people, but it wasn't for me, especially as a single mother. So maybe that complicated things. It added a different dynamic than maybe had I been a single woman without a young child at home.
Makes sense. So, kind of wrapping things up, tell me um, what advice you have, and then how do we encourage more women to pursue these non-traditional roles, such as aviation, and not even just necessarily as a pilot, but there's A&P. Like there's so many opportunities that women have, and while it is changing, as we've already discussed, how do we and you and I and the rest of the profession uplift women more and encourage them to at least consider and pursue? And then what advice do you have?
Well, being more visible, being a mentor, recommending organizations such as Women in Aviation International. They have a Girls in Aviation Day, usually around September, the third week in September, and they're all over America. We have some in Canada as well. It's a place where girls and young women can get exposed to the various flight schools, the various airlines and air academies or universities. When I say flight schools, I mean at your local airport, but there's also institutions like Embry-Riddle. Some of the big universities in Canada as well have aviation programs. And like you mentioned, it isn't just flying. I can think flying, but even the book, if you read my book, or I mean, not you did read my book, but if one would read my book, you could cross off pilot and cross off airplane and put in engineer and or aerospace information, maybe even lawyer. There's a lot of careers that are still fairly non-traditional, but you could be an aviation lawyer, for example. You mentioned airframe and power plant engineer, aircraft design, flight instructor, air traffic controller, ramp operator. I mean, there's so many careers that you could do, and almost all of them are still non-traditional, with the exception of counter customer service or counter rep, or of course flight attendants. But so in addition, so there's Women in Aviation International. They also have a magazine called Girls in Aviation International. You can find these online. It's wai.org. The 99s have the same sort of events. And they have magazines. We have outreach programs, audio visual, and we liaise with Women in Aviation International, and then I mentioned the Northern Lights Aero Foundation. All three of those organizations. Oh, and Elevate Aviation is in Canada as well, and all of them have mentorship programs. They have scholarships. They have Girls in Aviation Days. Elevate travels across Canada, and they go to various airports, and they prior to their arrival, they reach out to the schools. So that's one of the things I do, is go to schools, service clubs, libraries. And now, whenever possible, when I'm doing a book tour, I have a 20-minute PowerPoint presentation. It's Women in Aviation History. It's short. I mean, I could do a course in it, probably, a credit course in it. It's a 20-minute, it's kind of a nice little intro. It segues into the book. And it's personally narrated, so it changes a little bit every time. But I feel if they're interested in the book, they also need to know and realize, and I think most people know, that historically men have been the breadwinners, at least in North American society and European. But don't think people realize how still internalized that is, that we need to educate men and women equally, what they want to be. I mean, if you want to be a mother and a housewife, I'm all for that. But being forced into a forced choice career, secretary, nurse, teacher, nothing wrong with any of those. But even high school, I remember saying to my, well, how come, the boys in my class, they're always talking about, becoming a lawyer or a doctor or a pilot, and those careers just aren't encouraged or discussed for women. And I early on, my motto should have been ditch the double standard um, for women compared to men, because depending on your ability, obviously, you can be the best. You can always be the best you can be. You can't always be what you want to be. Like a ballerina. I will never be a ballerina, no matter how much I want to be a ballerina. It's not going to happen. So, but aviation, I think anybody can fly, or again, within an aviation field. So, advice, well, try it. Just go out and do it. Maybe you won't like aerospace. Maybe you won't like flying airplanes. Maybe you think, oh, I want to build those engines, but try it. And once you decide, be committed, um, be determined, believe in yourself. And sometimes that's hard for women as well, because especially as a single female employee as a pilot, I was constantly scrutinized and judged, and every mistake, and I made them for sure, I totally did. Every mistake was sort of like, oh yeah, we said she wasn't any good. Women aren't supposed to fly. And we've heard that actually since 1929, when one of the women in the air race bailed out of her airplane, which was about to crash, I guess. And it was published like, women have conclusively proven that they are not suitable for flying. And yet she was suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning from a leak from the engine into the cockpit. So yeah, it's going to be challenging for sure, and there will be barriers, but keep on trying. Just keep believing in yourself. Um, yeah, be committed and be
I
authentic. When I say authentic, in the sense of, as I said, I never wanted to be a man. I just wanted to fly.
Perfect. And then my final question, which deviates from all of that, because I could tell from the book that we both share a little bit of wanderlust. You've traveled to
Yes.
nearly 70 countries, I believe it is. Share with us a little bit about what your favorite destinations are and why, and a little bit about your travel life.
Okay. Well, I was so single for such a long time. I traveled solo and lived in Mexico for 3 years, primarily to work as a scuba dive master, but also to give me income while I followed my second passion, which is anthropology or ethnography and the study of the Maya. So I lived with four different Maya families in different areas. Guatemala, Belize, and Mexico, all of which are very close together. But my next book, which I've got about 35,000 words, talks so far mostly about two of those groups of people, which are similar but different, and living in two different countries, Mexico and Belize. So Mexico would have to be one of my favorite destinations. I was there last year. I love it. I go back frequently. Belize is similar. I mean, they're both in the Yucatan Peninsula, and they're on the second longest, or they're bordered by the second longest barrier reef in the world. Of course, Australia's Great Barrier Reef being the longest, but the Mexico and Belize Reef is spectacular. Morocco, probably up there as well. And I seem to have a thing for M countries. Malta. This is my husband's idea to go to Malta. And it's like, yeah, sure, whatever. As long as we can go to Istanbul, because I'd been wanting to go to Istanbul. So we'll do some in Malta and Istanbul. We had a great time in both. But Malta is an amazing, for a little tiny country, it's got just about everything. History, ancient structures, modern structures, World War II, fabulous history, great food, shopping. I don't even like shopping. I shopped there. It was great. The food was excellent. Sailing, snorkeling, scuba diving, really fascinating place. And my favorite trip, just for short-ish trips, is we trekked across Baffin Island a few years ago in 2019. There was my husband and me, a guide, and two of my husband's children, and a spouse. We had such a great time. The weather was stunning. We carried our own food, our own fuel. because there are very few trees in Baffin Island, and in fact none really, and where we were, and we traveled or trekked along a waterway, two rivers, and it was absolutely epic. I mean, we traveled up and down moraines and eskers and glaciers and crossed 22 raging rivers.
Wow.
OMG. The first one was pretty scary, but after a while it was like, yay, another one's coming up. And it was just one of the best trips ever. On the downside, we did another trip in Nepal, just another trek. We trekked around, not up, the eighth tallest mountain in the world. That would be Manaslu in Nepal's Himalayas. And I didn't like it as well. Sort of like the Baffin Island was the best trip ever. It was pristine. That is, the Baffin Island trip was pristine. It was quiet. We met a total of 6 other people in the 13 days, and 2 of them were park rangers. It's a national park, Canadian national park. And Nepal was wonderful. I love Nepal and the Nepalis, no problem there. But the first few days and the last day was trekking on a road, which wasn't that great. In fact, it was way crowded, and there was blasting going on as they had foreign investment building some roads. So, but once we got up into the mountains, like up higher into the mountains, it was really amazing. And it's funny. It's one of those trips that when I come back and I look at all my pictures and I'm putting together a PowerPoint presentation for the travelogue series I have, and I'm looking at the photos and it's like, yeah, that was really good. So it was oddly better in hindsight. Whereas the Baffin Island, I'm afraid to go back because I just don't think it would be as perfect. There was so much opportunity for someone to break a leg, break an arm, and except for a couple blisters, everybody survived intact. Nobody got sick even. Wow.
That's
It
great.
was amazing.
Well, Lola,
The only
thank you.
place, oh,
Oh, go ahead.
sorry.
No, that's all right.
The only place I've been that I didn't like was Lima, which is not a
Oh,
country, but it's a city in Peru. And I decided that I didn't like it mostly because it was always foggy. So it's a hot, moist climate, and you've got the cold Humboldt current running along it. It's like always foggy. And the airport is about 40 miles outside of town to get rid of this fog, because otherwise if you ever got in, you'd never get out again. So that was the only place I've ever been that I wasn't as happy with. But Peru I loved. Cusco was as spectacular as Lima was. Like, yeah, whatever. But I love traveling. I love traveling alone, and I love traveling with my husband. But when you travel alone, um, you're greeted differently by the locals, and who often wonder, gee, why is there a single female traveling alone? What's her story? And so you're often invited into homes, or obviously you have to be sometimes careful of that, but you're like, hey, you can strike up a conversation a little bit more easily. Although my husband is an absolutely great guy to travel with, but I never travel with friends except on these treks when you have to travel with people anyway. I always think, again, I love my friends and I love being with them here in town, but I want a new experience and I want to experience new people in a new area. So I almost never travel with friends.
very interesting. Yeah, travel can make or break a friendship, that's for sure.
It can. It can. We climbed Kilimanjaro in 2018, and we took 2 friends that were really good friends, but that's what we thought too. Oh dear, we'll either be not speaking to each other ever again, or we'll be really good friends. And actually, maybe a closing thought. We had wanted we climbed the mountain, the tallest freestanding mountain in the world. And I'd asked the other couple, if we had a choice, would you rather go on safari or would you rather go to the Spice Island of Zanzibar? And ultimately, we did have time to do both. But my friend Louise said, "Oh, I think I'd rather go, see some culture after we've, trekked up a mountain for 7 days, up and down a mountain. Let's go see some culture." So the most rewarding thing, and I still think about it often, we did the safari first, and we're all tired, obviously, after climbing Kilimanjaro. The last day was a slog, a summit, and then come down to the bottom of the mountain, basically. Um, So we get to the safari place, and the hotel is stunning, and it's out in the middle of the Serengeti and this huge vista. And we sit down in the lounge, and they give us a drink, a welcome drink. And Louise burst into tears. I went, "Oh no, what's wrong?" She said, "I didn't think it would be so beautiful." Yeah, I loved it.
Yeah.
So it can be rewarding to travel with friends.
Certainly, certainly. Yes. Well, Lola, thank you so much. What a fun episode this has been, and your life has been full of fun and adventure and some ups and downs, some turbulence, as we say in the airline industry, right? For sure.
Yes,
But thank you so much. How can
personal and
people learn
professional.
more about you?
Well, they can go to my website. Some of these podcasts that I've been on, which is great. Just Google my name. I'm hoping it'll pop up. But my website is lolareidallin.com, and you can contact me directly if you like. There is a link on the website, but also it's Lola at lolareidallin.com, and I do answer my emails.
Perfect. And I'll have all that in the show notes too.
Thank you so much. But please do reach out if you want any recommendations or suggestions. I'd be happy to refer to a flight school or a training academy in your area for further information.
That is great. All right. Hang on here.
Thank you so much. I've had a great time, Jackie.
Thank you. All right. So there you have it. Our two-part series interviewing Highway to the Sky author Lola Reid Allin. Be sure to check the show notes for how to get in touch with her. If you have any questions for me, let me know. If you'd like to be on the show, all of the details are at pilotwifepodcast.com. Do you ever find yourself on the struggle bus with relationships, career, or life in general? I'm a mindset and peak performance coach helping women rediscover their own sense of identity and purpose, avoid turbulence, and put their own oxygen mask on first. Together, we work to get you out of autopilot and create a better flight plan for life and relationship success. As a pilot wife for over 30 years, I've navigated thousands of miles and moments in aviation, mommyhood, business, and life in general. I would love to offer you a free call to see if I might be able to help you too. You can go to coach.pilotwifepodcast.com. And if you have a topic suggestion or a story to share on the show, go to ask.pilotwifepodcast.com. And of course, you'll find all of this at resources.pilotwifepodcast.com. Please take a moment to review and rate the show on whatever your favorite podcast app is. This helps the show get found by others who need what we have here. And you might win some fun swag for your troubles. I'll see you on the journey, and thanks for listening.